I am walking through one of the loveliest, most imaginative, visually richest buildings in the city of Philadelphia. And I am walking right now west towards the Schuylkill River, where in the 19th century, the massive growth of industry, lumber, brick, and stone yards attracted tens of thousands of Irish laborers. They came and they created the parish that built this church. 2 blocks behind me, to the east, is Rittenhouse Square, the most attractive and desirable neighborhood of elite Philadelphia, the age of industry. We are at a meeting place between 2 vital parts of the city who clashed in the 19th century, sometimes violently, and out of the cultural forces of that clash were unleashed great artistic energies and ambition. And they gave rise to the building we're in, St. Patrick's, Rittenhouse Square.
St. Patrick's Parish in Philadelphia, Rittenhouse Square, was founded in 1839, its first Mass happening on December 22nd of that year. In his diary, then Bishop Francis Patrick Kenrick wrote, "A chapel was opened in Schuylkill, 4th Street, near Spruce. Father Surin preached. The Father Daniel Devitt celebrated Mass. I have rented this house for a time, with the hope that in a short time a church might be built in the vicinity. It was an old naval home from along the Delaware River, which had been carted across the city to be repurposed as a carpenter's shop and also as a vinegar factory. It was then Bishop Kenrick purchased it for the use as a church and for 1 year a parish school during weekdays. The house itself would serve for the next 2 years until 1841 as the home of St. Patrick's Parish. It was located just a half-block north of the present-day Marathon Grill, just south of Rittenhouse Square. The initiative for a new parish in the Schuylkill neighborhood, far west of Center City, began with a man and a lawyer called Paul Riley. He had a meeting in his house earlier that year in 1839 because of the growing population of Irish workers moving west to work on unloading coal barges on the Schuylkill River. Rittenhouse Square at that time had been merely used as hunting grounds. Previously, there were cows and chickens grazing, and the square itself also had good clay reservoirs, and clay pits used as kilns were still visible in that time. Paul Riley called together some of these Irish, and they had a meeting at his house and petitioned the bishop in writing for a new parish. Knowing his middle name was Patrick, they sweetened the deal by offering the bishop his namesake to call the parish St. Patrick's.
As the name tells you, St. Patrick's, the most popular of Irish saints who converted Ireland, tells you that this is an Irish neighborhood, and it's part of the massive influx of Irish immigrants into the United States and into Philadelphia in particular, beginning in the 1830s. By the 1840s, this area was heavily Irish, but not rich Irish. They were laborers who worked in the brick yards, the stone yards, the lumber yards here along the Schuylkill River, just 4 blocks farther west. So a large parish, large families, not much money, and the first churches they built here and all over Philadelphia tended to be barns, brick barns, capacious as possible, decorated on the cheap materials that had been painted to resemble richer materials, with the idea as the church and the community got more prosperous, they could upgrade and they could take plaster fittings and replace them with bronze and brass and sculpture.
The parish founding has certain connections with the Dominican friars who were very late to arrive and care for the parish starting in 2018. The Dominican order was also founded, like St. Patrick's, on December 22nd, although much earlier, the year 1216. Bishop Kenrick himself, the founder of the parish, had come from Bardstown, Kentucky, where he was teaching in a seminary, St. Joseph. And in 1830, when he was named Philadelphia's newest bishop, he was ordained, consecrated a bishop by 3 other bishops. One of those was Edward Dominic Fenwick, who was the founder of the American Dominicans. The priest who celebrated Mass that day, Father Daniel Devitt, born and raised in Philadelphia. All previous priests had been from Europe, primarily Ireland. Daniel Devitt would serve for a long time at St. Patrick's. He would spend the first 6 years living in the home of Paul Riley as his residence before building a proper rectory. When St. Patrick's was operating out of that small house, the parish territory was very largely expanded to the west, the south, and the east. St. Patrick's served as the mission parish of the Diocese of Philadelphia, and so all the way through the 1850s, all of West Philadelphia to the airport, starting in the 1880s, all of South Philadelphia, and across to New Jersey, to Millville, to Cape May, even to the shore, fell under St. Patrick's parish territory, and Father Dan Devitt and a few other priests to help would ride on horseback, and we still have records of their sacraments that they performed at these mission parishes far outside of the city. In 1841, a proper church was built on our present site on 20th Street, Old St. Patrick's. Purchasing the land cost the equivalent today of $150,000, and ground was broken on July 4th of that year. Patrick Moriarty, the founder of Villanova University and an Augustinian missionary to India, preached the opening sermon at the groundbreaking. The church was designed by the architect Napoleon Lebrun, a Philadelphia native, also the same architect of the present Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul and the Academy of Music on Broad Street. Old St. Patrick's, since being torn down, has a twin sister, St. Philip Neri, in South Philadelphia, almost an exact twin and still standing, which is a good view of what our first church would have looked like if one only wanders into St. Philip Neri for Mass. The 1840s were a period of growth, with mass immigration from Ireland continuing, especially with the height of the potato famine in 1847.
This massive influx of immigration met with great hostility from the settled Protestant population of this city. Although the Quakers are renowned for their tolerance of religious difference, by the 1840s, Philadelphia was no longer really a Quaker city. The majority were Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, and other Protestant denominations, some of whom bitterly resented the Catholic presence. And this led to the anti-Catholic riots, which flared up again and again during the 1840s, and at its peak resulted in the burning down of several Catholic churches, schools, and houses in Northeast Philadelphia. And as a result, the Catholic community in Philadelphia rallied and built the great cathedral on the Parkway as a sign that we are here, we are unafraid, our roots are in Philadelphia, and we will build. And build they did. The church on this site, the predecessor of St. Patrick's, was, like many of them, a simple Greek revival box. Handsome, prim, portico at the front, but built on the cheap. And that church served this congregation for a good 70 years. But the population had grossly outgrown the capacity of that church. So this is part of a movement that happened all over Philadelphia in the years after 1900 of these earlier pre- and slightly post-Civil War churches outgrowing themselves and almost like a hermit crab needing to find a new home.
In 1852, a school was built. It was only the second Catholic school in the diocese after St. Mary's, and on opening day received 600 students, grades K through 8. There were also the arrival of many religious orders, specifically sisters, to help. The first sisters to arrive and help in the life of St. Patrick's Parish were the Sisters of the Good Shepherd in 1850, helping troubled girls off the street and from wayward lifestyles. Father Dan Devitt himself would celebrate a daily Mass for them. Just 3 years later, 1853, was the arrival of the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, who had a co-ed grade school and a high school for girls right on Rittenhouse Square, the present site of the Rittenhouse Hotel. In 1857, the Sisters of St. Joseph arrived to teach at St. Patrick's Grade School and would stay for 117 years of service before their departure in the 1970s. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, the Christian Brothers would arrive to teach the boys for a time. Because of the burning of coal in the city of Philadelphia, which not only dirtied the insides of churches, but also affected the pastor's lungs, after 17 years of service, in 1856, the first pastor announced that he was following, surprisingly, the California gold rush. He would move west to California, settling briefly in Monterey and Santa Barbara. Father Devitt would spend many more years on horseback throughout Central California, based in Visalia, California, founding churches in Porterville and the like. His territory in that time was the present Diocese of Fresno, about 20% of the state, comprising 34,000 square miles. A 1947 biography was written by a Dominican sister, Mary Thomas, called The Apostle of the San Joaquin Valley. St. Patrick's second pastor is William O'Hara. He had spent 13 years already at the parish as an assistant, and at the same time he served as rector of the seminary. Once made pastor, he made many renovations to Old St. Patrick's, stained glass windows for the first time, a new painting of the Immaculate Conception above the altar, and a pipe organ. More building continued as numbers grew, as St. Patrick's by the 1850s had the tripartite church, rectory, and school. These would be upgraded. A new rectory was added in 1860, which is our present rectory, 1 year pre-Civil War. It was Father O'Hara who invited in the Sisters of St. Joseph to teach at our school, and the Christian Brothers, both of whom stayed for a long time. Father O'Hara founded the Literary Society, which put on acts of theater, not only in the parish, in the hall, but also throughout the city theaters. It was a time when St. Patrick's parishioners were at their most theatrical. Father O'Hara was nicknamed the Old Doctor, and he was reminiscent in many ways of the figure G.K. Chesterton, both in his big stature and his charming personality. In 1860, the year before the Civil War, St. John Neumann, the bishop, died. His Requiem Mass was held at the cathedral, at that time St. John the Evangelist, but a month later, his second Requiem Mass, then called the Month's Mind Mass, was held at St. Patrick's to complete the funeral rites. Father O'Hara would see the parish through the Civil War years of the 1860s. The Civil War saw 1,715 men from the parish serve in the 69th Regiment Infantry out of New York. Though the Civil War helped the Irish to become better ingratiated as citizens in the United States, during the Victory Parade on Broad Street, many of these Catholic troops had bricks thrown at them by the citizens of Philadelphia to show that they were still not fully accepted. After the war, Father O'Hara approached his silver jubilee of 25 years. At a party thrown for him, he said, full of affection to the parishioners, in quotes, "For 24 years I have been among you. How calmly, how sweetly, how rapidly those years have glided by. It's beyond my power to explain. Here I celebrated my first Mass, returning to these shores. Here my lips were first opened to announce to the faithful the words of saving truth. Here I first administered the sacrament of baptism. Here the first couple stood before me, to be united in the bonds of holy wedlock. Here, in a word, I entered upon my career in the labors of the Lord's vineyard, and remained here to the present. And here I hope to have the happiness to bring it to a close. Happy indeed have been my days among you, days abounding in that wealth beyond all price, the wealth of heavenly consolation. From his ordination, Father O'Hara had spent a quarter of a century ministering entirely at St. Patrick's. It was just 2 years later, when he was named the first bishop of a new diocese, Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he would spend the remainder of his life. St. Patrick's third and fourth pastors had brief tenures. The third, Father Patrick Nugent, was transferred from St. John the Baptist in Manayunk, where he was pastor, and he only served at St. Patrick's for 7 months, until, for health reasons, he resigned and would spend the remainder of his life as a chaplain overseas to a monastery of French nuns. The fourth pastor, Father James Mulholland, was a high liturgist. He served as MC for many of the diocesan events and liturgies. His older brother, St. Clair Mulholland, was a major general in the Union Army. 1883 saw a new school building, our present school building, put up. After 17 years of service at St. Patrick's, Father Mulholland took a trip to Hong Kong, India, the Holy Land on horseback, and the parish heard from a telegram, very sadly, during the Rosary procession, that their pastor had died at breakfast in Alexandria, Egypt. Though he was a high liturgist, his funeral mass was quickly celebrated by the Egyptian Franciscans in a very low form. He had had a heart condition, and after much travel, had expired. His body was brought back for a funeral properly a month later at St. Patrick's. The fifth pastor is perhaps the greatest historic figure in the parish, William Kieran, who not only built our present church, but is the longest reigning pastor of 35 years. Father Kieran was from Ireland. His older brother was the pastor of St. Anne's in Port Richmond, where he and his mother had immigrated to and resided in the rectory during his childhood with his older brother as priest. Father Kieran was noble, he was moral, and he was a man known not only of his love for orthodoxy, but also his love for the poor. In 1904, an extra parish hall for events was built on 21st and Nowdane. It's possible to see this building today. Our present church of St. Patrick's, which is the second church in the parish history, was built in 1910. The need for a new church was due to overflow between masses. Numbers had increased such that masses were every hour at the church, and on the half-hour extra masses were in the school auditorium.
They got a fashionable young New York firm called Lafarge and Morris, two architects just beginning to practice designing elite clubs and churches. I suspect we will find somewhere in the archives some personal connection or family connection that brought them here. But you could not have picked two better architects to build this, because if you think about the pattern, these rapidly built churches of the 1870s and 80s, shoestring budget, brick warehouses of space decorated on the cheap, were essentially theatrical boxes. They presented a festive and decorous and dignified setting for the Mass, but at some level they were like stage scenery. They were false. They were plaster and paint pretending to be richer materials. Not in this church. The remarkable fact about this church is everything is real. All the colors, the chromatic effect, the lustrous effects of light hitting matter are all achieved honestly by using the materials themselves. So the remarkable thing about it is the chief architect, Lafarge, was the son of America's most chromatically sophisticated painter, John Lafarge, the man who gave us the greatest Victorian stained glass, opalescent glass. Lafarge was a painter who thought in terms of color. He yearned to make rich color as vibrant as possible, that eventually he abandoned the brush and shifted to light itself with his windows. His son grows up in this hothouse atmosphere of love of color. What color can do for a wall, for a space. And as we look around this church, we will see that it is an essay in color. This reddish maroon tile of the floor, the attractive buff beige brick of the wall, all around the altar, marble in green, gray, and white. The oak of these pews, everything has been chosen almost with a musical deliberation to make a kind of chord of color, that each note vibrates into something richer than itself. And this was not the pattern in Philadelphia.
In the summer of 1910, in July, Old St. Patrick's Church was closed. Parishioners attending the final Mass were instructed to take a piece of ivy from the side wall of the church as a memento. And by the 2nd of October, Rosary Sunday, came the greatest day in the parish's history in terms of drawing a great crowd. It was the day of the laying of the new cornerstone, a 700-pound piece of marble from County Armagh in Ireland, the hill where St. Patrick built his cathedral in Ardmachcha. That stone was shipped overseas, and not only a stone, but Michael Cardinal Logue, St. Patrick's successor, the Bishop of Armagh, returning from a Eucharistic Congress in Montreal, stopped by to perform the ceremony at our parish in Philadelphia. 30,000 people thronged the streets. The newspaper report that day said the crowd even crushed certain people, that they had to be taken away in an ambulance. They crowded on housetops. They crowded down the block. They crowded on the rectory roof. The ceremony began with processions, with Cardinal Logue and many other bishops from around the world who were also visiting during their return from the Montreal Congress. The procession exited from the rectory front door, went down among the foundation of the crypt church being built, with holy water being sprinkled by the cardinal in all corners of the church. He then placed historic objects inside the stone itself, sealed the cement, and blessed the stone, and then there were speeches. Then Pastor William Kieran gave the first address, and he prayed aloud to God above the crowd. To Thee, O Lord, we first give the glory, as within these walls Thou wilt take up Thy abode to pour out blessings on this and future generations. He also addressed St. Patrick, the patron, saying, To the apostle of our race we lift up our souls in gratitude for his prayer that the faith of Christ not depart from the race he converted is seen in its fulfillment in this century. May the spiritual temple of each man be built up, the cornerstone of which is humility. May each have a love that embraces all, no matter what be a man's color, nationality, or creed. The light that comes from this sanctuary will be the light that enlighteneth every man that cometh into this world.
You're looking here at one of the loveliest aspects of this church, the vaulted ceiling. You know, the typical pattern in Philadelphia in the 19th century was that the ceiling was essentially wood, plaster, and paint that had been dolled up to look like a respectable imitation of a Baroque ceiling. But basically it was sham construction. This is not sham, this is the real thing. This is a particular type of vaulting called Gus Desimone tile. It's a thin tile shell, fireproof, very lightweight, very strong, very durable. It's used as the cap for the New York City subway station. So even at the ceiling, the architects are telling you this church is a real thing. When people think about architecture, they usually think about features like walls and roofs. But the floor is really one of the central architectural elements, and it can be very beautiful. This happens to be an extraordinarily lovely floor. It's made out of red ceramic tile, attractively ruddy, and also attractively rounded. The experience of walking on it is a very pleasant tactile experience, so it's a little massage. But it tells you also about the origin of the church, because interlaced among it are simple stenciled designs going back from the earliest Christian symbols in the catacombs of ancient Rome. If you look here, these are little bits of inset stone that glistened like jewels. This is treating the floor as a jewel box of precious stones. The tiles were manufactured in Doylestown at the famous Moravian Tile Works, created by the genius of Doylestown, Henry Mercer. So the color essay of this building goes from the top of the ceiling all the way down to the floor you're on. It's also been graded to correspond with the colors to which you're heading, which are the white, green, and gray marble around the altar. People always ask me what style this church is in, and they don't like the answer. The answer is eclectic, that it draws on elements from different eras of architectural history. A basic answer could be that it's Byzantine. It uses the shallow domical vaults of Byzantine architecture, and that's somewhat true. The rich encrusted stone, marble walls are Byzantine in character. But when you approach the altar, suddenly you get something completely different. The altar itself is a magnificent recreation of a Roman triumphal arch. It's one of the great architectural elements that Rome gave us, the arch through which a victorious general or emperor would enter, returning fresh from his military triumph. What the church is telling you, it's the triumph of the resurrection happening here. The element of the Roman triumphal arch would be the portal in the center, flanked on either side by lower passages. If you go to Rome, you'll see the Arch of Constantine, probably the greatest of these. But here, there is no portal for a general to advance through. The central portal is taken over by the cross, which is the resurrection itself, which is recreated at the service of the Mass. And here, the subdued colors that have been accompanying you on your procession to the altar, that is this buff and beige brick wall, the subdued colors above of the creamy Guastavino tile, the maroon floor, suddenly give you an explosion of intense color of white marble with green columns of marble to either side. As a chromatic experience, it's the richest that the building has to offer, and it's very appropriate. It should be right above the altar itself.
Another speech that day was given by a layman and a parishioner, Walter George Smith. He was a professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania and had married St. Catherine Drexel's sister and was very devoted to our parish. The whole ceremony ended by singing the hymn, "Holy God, we praise thy name." But in the morning, the stone was found to be chipped and vandalized, just as at the laying of the cornerstone of Old St. Patrick's in 1841, someone in the crowd spit upon the stone. Neither of our two cornerstone events went without trouble and a bit of persecution from locals.
This church is also, I suspect, a bit of a provocation to Protestant Philadelphia. After all, it is one block in that direction from Philadelphia's most fashionable square, Rittenhouse Square. Well, this church asserts Catholic identity at a social meeting place where prosperous Protestant Philadelphia looks down on riverfront, poor Irish Philadelphia. So it was very important that this building, in its quiet way, asserted itself on aesthetic terms as a statement of the Catholic contribution to Philadelphia, because rather than being a closed-off citadel turning its back on the city, it provides a fabulous gift to this neighborhood, particularly in the portal and the stone-adorned walls.
When Father Kieran, after 35 years of service, died, there was an all-night vigil held, where mothers and children and workmen and dignitaries and people of all castes and all types passed by all night. Past his body he lay in state with a chalice in his hands. Father Kieran, in his personality, was masculine and athletic. He loved orthodoxy, he had a nobility about him, but also a love for the poor. Father Kieran was to see the parish through the World War I years. World War I saw our parish providing 289 men going off to war, and a priest in residence at St. Patrick's, Father Joseph Leo Wolfe, would become a military chaplain. Not only so, he would after the war become the national chaplain of the American Legion, and he would be the first American priest to ever give a sermon in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, before General Pershing and many others in a victory mass post-war. When Father Kieran was celebrating his 50 years of priesthood at St. Patrick's, his Golden Jubilee, during that celebration he said to the parishioners, in great humility, in quotes, "One looks into his heart and feels that he has fallen short of his high ideal. This reflection comes after 50 years of priesthood." He then called the brothers and the sisters who taught at the school the jewels in the parish crown of glory. A great event in our parish history is that of the 1918 Spanish flu, whose outbreak affected, above all American cities, Philadelphia. Over 16,000 people would lose their lives in the city in the month of October alone. This was the time especially when religious sisters shone forth in great virtue. Not only transitioning from teaching to nursing the sick, but also to farming, running many errands, and doing multiple tasks for which they were known in an ordinary heroism. St. Patrick's Parish Hall on Nowdane Street became, for a brief time of 18 days, Emergency Hospital Number 8. The local police would deliver sick patients to these emergency hospitals, including our parish hall. While the sisters would care for them, there was a priest chaplain assigned to administer sacraments, while seminarians were errand runners and grave diggers. In the 18-day effort, 200 people's lives were saved in St. Patrick's Parish Hall, and 34 had died, yet with the sacraments. To succeed Father Kieran was his longtime assistant, Father John Thompson, who had already served 17 years at St. Patrick's, very much helped Father Kieran in his illness and during the building of our new church. He would serve 16 more years as pastor, as one fellow priest called him, the huge, jolly, and beloved Father Thompson. The older parishioners of St. Patrick's today would remember Monsignor Vallely as their childhood pastor. The parents of our oldest parishioners would remember Father Thompson as their favorite. He was a native son of St. Patrick's, baptized, First Communion, First Mass of priesthood, along with his brother Robert. He was a close friend of Cardinal Doherty, the great prelate of that age. He would host in his time Eamon de Valera, the Prime Minister of Ireland, who had dinner at St. Patrick's with Father Thompson and the Cardinal. Two notable actions of Father Thompson's kindness would be during the Great Depression. In 1929, St. Patrick's started a soup kitchen in its parish hall. They would serve 500 people daily for meals. In those Depression years, Father Thompson also purchased a country home in Bucks County, not only for priests to escape to for a time in the country, but for parish picnics, groups of children and families as a respite from the depressing city life of that era. In 1933, still at the height of the Depression, our St. Therese stained glass window in the lower church and St. Therese statue, as well as the Lourdes grotto, were both installed, though we did not have the money for either, as a way to encourage and console the people going through hard times, to give them renditions of their favorite devotions, St. Therese and Our Lady of Lourdes.
I work in Center City since 1967. You know, I was only 4 blocks away from here.
This church is very important for me because first of all, I got married here. Then I baptized both of my kids here. So ever since I moved here, this has become my parish, my church, my way of life. Living across the street and having the business across the street, you're kind of touched.
And I prefer this room better than the upstairs, to tell you the truth. You know, because of my mother, she like
Madonna de Lourdes, she used to come here in prayer.
I go down and light a couple candles for my mother. I come in on Saturday because my mother, she used to come in on Saturday. And I used to pick him up, 10 minutes before the mess was over, that way, making sure she was okay, walking and everything. That's why we're here, for my mother,
Like Father Kieran, Father Thompson, when he died, was also laid in state, and both of them buried in the crypt of St. Patrick's. The 7th pastor of St. Patrick's, Monsignor James Vallely, took charge in 1938 and would hold his post until 1969. He saw the parish through World War II, through Vatican II, and many other events besides. Like many of our previous pastors, he was born in Ireland. Arriving at St. Patrick's, he faced years' worth of debt, not only replacing all of the roofs of the properties, but paying off the building of the church itself. The parish hall on Nowdane was sold. Vallely began his tenure reducing and then eliminating the parish debt. This he accomplished in just a record few years by the power of the almighty game, bingo. They had bingo all the time. His time as pastor spanned cultural changes in America as vast as moving from Benny Goodman's orchestra to Woodstock in the year of his retirement, from the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to the release of Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Although, in a manner of speaking, St. Patrick's priests were living in high times, enjoying favor in society, entertaining heads of state from Ireland in their dining room, as well as cardinals and prelates, Monsignor Vallely faced about, in today's terms, a $6 million debt. The neighborhood at this time had changed somewhat because of the Depression. What was once known as Philadelphia, the city of homes, had many properties in our neighborhood sold off, and this was the era of high-rise apartment buildings, bringing further population into the parish. Bingo games grew so popular that all 3 floors of our school building were filled on Friday night, and parishioners voluntarily paved the basement in concrete just to create a 4th floor, more space for more bingo. With the debt being paid off, the parish's 100th anniversary of its founding was postponed until the year of 1940. In December of 1940 was the largest celebration to date, our parish's 100th anniversary since its founding. Very soon after, however, where the new pastor with his parish would have to face World War II. During the course of the war, the parish had weekly announcements at all masses updating on every one of men wounded or nurses who had been shipped out to the front lines. Our parish hall was opened as a blood bank and to give first aid classes, while children and mothers roamed the neighborhood for food drives and scrap metal drives. This was also the era when the block rosary was started by the sodality, women meeting in each other's homes every Monday evening to pray the rosary for the safety of the troops. This lasted well into the 1970s.
When Mom came down to Dad's house, she talked to the neighbors on our block, and most of them were Catholic, and they agreed that they wanted to start a block rosary. So every Monday night, it would be a different home. It would rotate from week to week, and we would all kneel on the floor and pray the rosary. When it was over, the person who was hosting it that night would serve refreshments, tea and cookies or pound cake, and it would turn into a little social. And I remember that for many, many years that went on.
Also, the October block collection began when the priest would visit during that month. All the families of the parish, he would greet them, they would give him a donation, and he would give a blessing to the house. Monsignor Vallely would attend school on Mondays with the children and was familiar to them all. And he loved, like his predecessors, the dignity of the Irish. He loved to quote the phrase, which was often said, "Time was made for slaves, but not for the sons of Irish kings." There was a notion of royalty in those days if you were Irish. Finally, on May 6, 1945, our Sunday Mass announcement read, "As soon as it shall have been announced officially that the war in Europe has come to an end, our church bell will be rung for 30 minutes. Both upper and lower churches will be open for you to come and thank God for the victory." In total, of the many hundreds of men and women from our parish who served in the war, 6 from our parish lost their lives. After the conclusion of World War II is when much of the parish population began to be depleted, preferring to move to the suburbs for other opportunities of work, more space in front or backyards. Havertown itself gained the nickname of the 33rd Irish County in those days. In Rittenhouse Square and Devil's Pocket, our neighborhood, the American Legion provided a social center for veterans. In the summer, from Thursday until Saturday, there would be block parties thrown with food, drinking, boxing, and raffles. There was always a Memorial Day parade organized by the American Legion in Marquardt Park. The parade, with members of West Catholic High School marching band, would march to St. Patrick's. They would have a mass and return to the park for a barbecue. This continued for many decades.
We would all meet down at the post, the American Legion post. They decorate their bikes, they decorate their coaches, and we'd march up the neighborhood. And we would come up here, the 23rd, over 23rd, down Lombard to 27th, over 27th, up south to Taney, over Taney to where the American Legion post was. And they'd give out ice cream and stuff like that. But it was a whole day affair. Oh yeah, they had, for the older guys, they had beer drinking contests.
Today, many Philadelphians familiar with the shore can forget that this really was a post-war movement rising in popularity ever since the return of our troops. Around this time, a dear friend of Monsignor Vallely's, Father William Campbell, who preached many sermons at our parish and was a professor at the seminary, began the Stations of the Cross meditations, which were aired over the radio, WDAS, every Friday at 11 a.m. This started in Lent of 1947 and lasted many years, where Stations of the Cross were broadcast each Friday of Lent from our parish. 1954 was the 100th anniversary of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. Our lower chapel underwent great renovations by John McShane, who was known as the man who built Washington, D.C., and a longtime parishioner here at our parish. The side walls of the chapel were redone in Vermont marble, a terrazzo floor was laid, new stained glass windows from Brooklyn, the Ave Maria Company, were put in place, and a new baptismal font and a shrine for the Book of Kells were added with northern Italian marble.
Monsignor Valley, he used to come into the children on Monday morning and go to the different classrooms and ask them what the gospel was about. At Christmas time, he always gave you a box of candy. He was just a really nice individual, as was everyone that was at St. Patrick's, including the St. Joseph nuns. Sister Thomas Aquinas was the music teacher, and she always used to stand and tell us that we had to sing the hymn to St. Patrick, give it some livelihood, don't sing it like a dirge.
Great and glorious St. Patrick, pray for our dear country, the country of our fathers. Great and glorious St. Patrick. Monsignor Valley, he was a good, stern Monsignor here. That's why this place lasted so long. One instance, Monsignor Valley was asked by Sister Divine Heart to come over to chastise me regarding a wording of saying, I goose somebody. I might have repeated what somebody else says. Goose me, goose me. I got a little upset myself. I said, I don't even know what that means. He says, well, look, calm down. This is not a bribe or anything. He says, I just wanted you to relax, so I'm going to give you this little coin just to say everything's okay. He said, now just put it right in your pocket. I put that right in my pocket. I didn't even know what it was, so I left about a block down, and I said, oh, wow, a quarter. Believe it or not, nobody's seen quarters. Pennies and nickels and dimes, no quarters. Quarters, geez. And I always remember Father Valley giving me that quarter, and he says, don't tell nobody. I said, okay.
The life of a parish sees large events, but also the usual rhythms of life. There was always the yearly May crowning, where an 8th grade girl, the May Queen, was elected as a sort of honor in leading the procession.
The May Queen, it was always the girl from the 8th grade, and my mother was May Queen here. My sister Jeannie was May Queen here, and myself was May Queen here. I walked with the May Queen. She was from down on Nordain Street. Her last name was Appenzeller, and it was Ann Haney and myself were the little girls who walked with the May Queen, and that was a tradition always in May, and was always also on the day of First Communion.
The 40 hours devotion, always popular in Philadelphia, saw especially the altar boys taking the brunt of keeping vigil, staying awake all night before the Blessed Sacrament, while many other parishioners came to adore by day. The altar boys also recall, in addition to their prayers, meeting in Fittler Square Park every Wednesday evening for fist fights.
When you were a boy, there's two things. You're either an altar boy or a choir boy, right? I was an altar boy. So after the 40 hours, right, they used to have, it was known that the altar boys and the choir boys are going to fight right next to the church, Rittenhouse Street. Now, some guys did fight, other guys just messed around, but yeah.
There were always masses and other sacraments around the clock at St. Patrick's, and uniquely, like many parishes, a children's mass at 9 a.m., which was so full only children could attend with their own envelopes, a sermon catered to them. Monsignor Vallely in 1947, after World War II, even had a SEPTA bus, which had a special Sunday route to pick up parishioners on their way directly to St. Patrick's. It was driven by parents whose children were at St. Patrick's School as a way of making up for the church collection paying for their children's tuition. In 1969, after the Second Vatican Council, when the church liturgy changed to English at our parish, when Our great renovation and consecration of the upper church had been completed. With all debts paid, with the council underway, Monsignor Vallely retired in the year of 1969 and stayed in residence for a couple of years before his death and burial at our parish. His reputation still draws many comments, being a priest who was stable and good and faithful to his people, and yet someone who also, in the old school manner, still inspired fear. After his long tenure in retirement, St. Patrick's had a series of pastors leading up to the present. Through the 70s, we had Monsignor Frank Kelly, the 8th pastor. He was a Navy chaplain nicknamed Father Foxhole. He only lasted at St. Patrick's for 2 years and then re-enlisted for active duty to serve as a chaplain in Vietnam.
I was drafted in 1963. I was 23 years old and I thought I'd beat the draft. But I was drafted by President Kennedy, and I was down in Fort Polk, Louisiana in November, and the sergeant came in and said, "You're going to have to go down and draw weapons and ammo because they just shot the President of the United States, President Kennedy." And then after a few hours, they called it off when they found out Oswald had done it. They thought the Russians were involved in it. I was sent to Germany because Germany was still an occupied country back in '63, and the Russians were threatening to come in and take the free side. So we went over, I was sent over there, and a couple of guys from the neighborhood, I ran into them too. They were sent over there too. So I did 2 years in Germany, and fortunately I wound up on the marksmanship team. I could shoot, and I didn't have to pull any KP, guard duty, or nothing. All I had to do was just shoot and hit that target 500 yards away.
In his final months as pastor, Monsignor Frank Kelly, through connections in golf and the athletic world, was asked to bless the newly built Veterans Stadium for the Eagles and the Phillies in the year 1971. The pastor of the mid-1970s was Father Francis Sherry, who many parishioners remember for having celebrated their weddings, until in 1976 he took a leave of absence for reasons of health. He was succeeded by Father Peter Fitzpatrick, who celebrated the 150th anniversary of the parish. He began the CCD program for children and religious education after the closure of the school in the 1970s.
I was going to work for a couple of years after high school to get money for college. I didn't have enough money for it at the time, but I wanted to become an elementary school teacher in a parochial school. And when he heard that, that was all it took Father Fay to say, "Have I got the job for you? I need you to be a volunteer teacher in our religious education program." He said, we really need help. And I said, "Father, I just graduated high school. I'm not a teacher yet. I've tutored children, but I don't have experience or the credentials." "You don't need them," he said. "You're a Catholic. I want you to do this. Right now we have one man, he's a lawyer. He doesn't have the credentials to teach either, but he's doing his best, but he's the only teacher, so he's got all the children at the same time, all the different ages. We need your help." So at that point, I would have taught anything. I would have taught basket weaving if I could have gotten experience teaching. So of course I agreed. And I've been working with that group for 32 years now. But I can say through the years, I built it up, and I begged the parish to recruit more volunteers so we could split the children up into different age groups, which we did. And to this day, I still have grown children that sometimes I run into in town and say, "Miss Tobin, you taught me religion. I was your first communion student." And so that's very sweet.
It was in the 1980s when the St. Patrick's Parade Mass was moved from the cathedral to our parish at the invitation of Father Peter Fitzpatrick. It has stayed that way to this day, and many Irish societies gather for the Parade Mass. He was followed as well in the 1990s by Monsignor Philip Dowling, who renovated the parish hall and was known for his kindness and his poetic nature. And then there was the long tenure of the 11th pastor, Father Dan Mackel, who also was a native son of the parish, a very cogent and powerful brief homilist, and who left St. Patrick's to teach liturgy at the seminary. Father Mackel started a youth group at the parish, performed many weddings, and always taught courses at the seminary in liturgy, taking the bus to work, with a degree he held from the University of Notre Dame. This is before the Dominicans arrived in the year 2018. Father George Schomer, the 12th pastor, followed by Father Hyacinth Cordell at present. There were many other priests through the ages. Father Fonash would play the organ and would help with CCD. Father Michael Leo Walsh would always challenge parishioners to tennis matches, and he was chaplain of the Senior Citizen Social Society.
I knew that when my grandmother came here, she was a working girl, and we were told that she made $3 a week. One went to this church, one went home, and one was hers to spend. There were a lot of Irish immigrants here in this church. They raised beautiful families and who went on to be very successful in life. My dad was a naval officer and a college grad. My Uncle John, the priest here, and a St. Pat's boy. My Uncle Jimmy was in the Navy. My Aunts Hannah and Aunt Mary, and a lot of fun with Irish singing all the time. But I'm touched because they all made their baptisms, communions, and confirmations, and some of them weddings here. And additionally, Uncle John said his first priestly mass here after he was ordained in 1945. So I'm proud of the fact that the Irish came from nothing, from the little hills of Donegal with nothing. They built these churches, they maintained them, they practiced their faith, and just created a beautiful parish.
At one time, at its height, St. Patrick's Rectory housed 12 priests, many of whom taught at Roman Catholic High School or the seminary, but would assist also in many other activities at the parish. To recount the events in the life of St. Patrick's Parish, some of these are major in history, and others were ongoing throughout the week. What today we call groups in a parish were then in the day called societies. Old St. Patrick's, from its founding in 1841, had many societies. The first, which sprung up in 1840, was the Total Abstinence Society of swearing off all alcohol. St. Patrick's, though the parish had two of the largest whiskey distillers in the city attending Mass, also boasted the diocese's largest Total Abstinence Society. Rivaling that was the Sodality of the Blessed Virgin Mary, devoted to the Rosary and Marian devotion, founded in 1850. In their Golden Jubilee of 1900, a beautiful crown was made by collecting jewels from all of the parishioners, and that crown is now placed on Mary in her crowning every May. Other societies were those of the Scapular, the Rosary Society, a Eucharistic League, Our Lady of Mercy, founded for service to the poor. Though our parish has not always been a place simply of the rich and the famous, it has over the years attracted certain people of fame to visit our parish. During the filming of movies, both Mark Wahlberg and Mel Gibson would oftentimes attend Mass. Mel Gibson himself knocked on our front door and asked the priest for spiritual direction the day after 9/11 happened, as he was staying in the Rittenhouse Hotel. Billy Cunningham, the star player and head coach of the 76ers, who won 2 different championships, had his daughter married at our parish. The boxer of the early century, Tommy Loughran, who had fought all the great heavyweights, was also for a time a member of the parish and seen with great frequency. Don Amici, the Hollywood movie star, also lived in our parish towards the end of his life and would oftentimes step in to be the altar server when the younger boys mistakenly slept in. Bishop John Neumann, a saint in the Catholic Church, visited our parish often in the late 1850s. In 57, he performed the ordination of 6 priests. In 59, he celebrated a high mass on the feast of St. Patrick, and in his tenure as bishop, on 4 separate occasions, he celebrated confirmation for over 300 students each year, the records of which we still have in our registry. Father Augustus Tolton of the Diocese of Chicago, and the first black man from the United States to be ordained a Catholic priest, visited our parish to preach a sermon. He returned again 2 years later in 1892 to attend Vespers when he was in town for the dedication of a new church, St. Peter Claver. It wasn't until the late 1980s when graduate students from Drexel and the University of Pennsylvania began to move into and revive the neighborhood again, and to this day, those same students comprise a great percentage of our parish makeup. Of the families who had moved away, the great yearly reunion at our parish is the parade mass for St. Patrick's Day.
The St. Patrick's Day Mass was beautiful. There was a procession of priests who were all St. Pat's boys who walked up the aisle, and the church was just packed with family and friends, and they all winked and waved, and we were all very proud of our uncle priests. But it was a camaraderie among everybody who had gone to this school, who came back and relived their memories. So it was very special. My parents loved to come every St. Patrick's Day.
Every year in our parish's history, on March 17th, the feast day of St. Patrick, we would often invite a bishop or a prelate as a special guest to celebrate the noon mass of that day. This continued even until the time of Cardinal Kroll, who accepted the invitation yearly. There was, however, a parade mass, always on the Sunday before St. Patrick's Day, held at the cathedral. It was in the 1980s when Cardinal Bevilacqua had this move to our parish, and he would march in the parade afterward. To this day, on the Sunday before the Saints' Feast, the parade mass gathers at our parish. It's the only mass where you may find a head of state from Ireland visiting the city, which has happened 4 times in our parish history. It's the only mass where you're guaranteed to have a family reunion of all Irish families from the Philadelphia area. There will always be bagpipes. There will always be, as they say, 7 shades of green. As religious friars invited to serve at a diocesan parish with such great history, it really is humbling to work at St. Patrick's. Not only because of the beautiful and historic buildings, not only because of the great stories in history, but also the people themselves, the many faces which make up the parish and which make up the church, those faces past and also faces present.
My grandparents didn't know me. They were dead before I was born. When I'm here, I feel that I'm meeting with them. I don't feel that way at the cemetery. I don't feel that way anywhere else. So it's interesting to me that now their granddaughter and grandchildren, today their great-grandchildren are here with me today. So it's full circle. I love certain parishes, but this is where I was born. And it means a lot. It means a lot to my family.
Those attending Mass or those stopping on a quiet afternoon to still light a candle in our crypt chapel. Many people find refuge from the city outside. Many faces visit our doors, and they are the face of the church. These people are the history of the parish, and as such, history is hard to capture. We have books and records and essays, and yet, though it matters to go over old books and old details to gain a sense of the past, sadly, so much of the life and vibrancy is lost from the records. We do not have an immaculate past. All has not been glorious in that the Church and her priests have fallen on hard times. Although all Catholics must take seriously and do penance on behalf of our sins, we also must know our history. History alone helps us see the whole. It helps us breathe easier in seeing the details of each generation's shame and each generation's triumph. If sins can be published, all the more should we publish and study the details of what is good and true and beautiful in the church. St. Paul says in his letter to the Romans, where sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. This is true in real life and in real parishes. And if we don't ourselves see it, then we are swayed more by newspapers than the Word of God itself and the real history of a real people who call themselves Catholics. From our humble beginnings to our present day, the priests and parishioners of St. Patrick's seek Christ, and we return always to the prayer that our patron St. Patrick himself wrote. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arrive, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. Christ started this parish. He is still present, still blessing it, and He is responsible for it all.